Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So on this time's episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm delighted to be welcoming Elizabeth Lotardo. She is a global best-selling author and thought leader in self-leadership and career management. So welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Claire.
Let's start as we generally do with your career journey. You've been through several pivots and challenges in your career, starting in marketing and brand management at organizations that are pretty well known, such as Monster or Boston University. 10 years ago, you managed to begin a career in client services in a leadership consultancy whose clients include Hilton and many of the Berkshire Hathaway companies. And you hold that role to this day, while also writing best-selling books, LinkedIn learning courses, and HBR articles. That's a lot to be doing all in one go. Tell us how this extraordinary portfolio career has unfolded, and perhaps talk about the role design and serendipity have played as you've gone along.
I appreciate the question and the phraseology of a portfolio career because I think that's what so many are starting to create, not necessarily by design. And by design was certainly not in my case, but by serendipity. So I started out my career in advertising and marketing. I went to school studying advertising and psychology and liked it for a while. But after a time, I started to feel really burned out and transactional. I was selling Google AdWords. A lot of my conversations were talking about half a cent on a particular term. And I burned out really quickly. And the creativity and the relationships and the emotional part of that career that I love so much started to slip away from me. So I quit my job without much of a plan B. I had one small freelancing gig and I went back to school to study organizational psychology. That lane embodied the creativity, the humanity, the relationships that I love so much in advertising, but enabled me to make more of an impact because instead of being focused on what converts half a cent cheaper on Google AdWords, my career shifted focus to what makes people feel engaged at work and how can we enable them to do their best work. I started writing training programs, a lot of which were for LinkedIn Learning. It evolved in a really both intentional and serendipitous way from there. I took on a client services role in a consulting firm focused on training and emotional engagement. I started to attract some of my own clients and build my own content. And eventually, after a decade, wrote my own book.
Beautiful. It does sound like a fairy story, however serendipitous and undesigned it was. But you found the thing that makes you sing and express it in different ways now, I guess.
It looks really rosy from the outside, right? But that journey was filled with a lot of challenges like everyone's was. And even to this day, I find myself in moments where I'm frustrated and I don't know what to do. I love my job, but I am frustrated by it sometimes, as we all are.
Even those of us who have the good fortune to be working in something that makes us say things like we love our job, that doesn't mean that we don't wake up sometimes at 2:00 in the morning in a cold sweat thinking, where am I getting my next client from? That never goes away. All these things about when is enough apply regardless. But thinking through all the different organizations and leaders that you've worked with over this time, what would you say are the standout lessons that you've learned at any of these impressive places?
There's a pull-through thread that I only realized years after I started seeing it. And that is the thread that prompted me to write my book, Leading Yourself. So a lot of my work is focused on emotional engagement. And I want to differentiate that from workplace satisfaction. Like satisfaction is, oh, I like my job, like this is good. Emotional engagement is I'm coming up with ideas, I'm giving discretionary effort, I will give more of myself to this. So I'm focused on that second bent in both my research and my consulting. And for a lot of years, I was trying to find the perfect recipe for emotional engagement. this much of a great boss. It's this much of learning and development opportunities. It's this much compensation and horizon for career growth. And I was unable to find it. And I was getting really frustrated in my research and my consulting practice because right when I thought I had the recipe, like, okay, this is it, this is the secret formula for engagement, I would talk to someone else who was highly engaged and they didn't have any of those things. So I went round and round and round. And what I realized, the pull through thread through all of these great organizations, through all of these highly engaged leaders I had the privilege of working with, was a sense of agency that I now refer to as self leadership. When so many were looking at all the things they couldn't control, these exceptional standouts were looking at all the things they could control. When so many people felt powerless in the face of external circumstances, these standouts felt powerful, sitting in the exact same seat. And that distinction took me so long to name. And it sounds simple now that I've named it, and it is kind of intuitive, but it's hard to execute. And looking back, so many people through my career that I admired were executing it.
It is amazing how long it can take us sometimes to find that hindsight perspective in order to pull together all we've been thinking about, struggling with, pondering on, or whatever it might be.
And I fell victim to that in my early career too. I look back on the time when I was burned out in advertising, thinking that was everybody else's fault but mine, and didn't realize how much control, 22, 24-year-old Elizabeth actually did have.
Well, let's go back to some of these transitions that you made. And as you say, maybe your career has been more about adding on to existing experience as opposed to necessarily a massive pivot. But why don't you talk us through your most challenging and disruptive transition from one context to another?
The most challenging transition for me was right after I left my career in advertising. I wrote what at the time was an article that went really viral. And it was called Why Millennials Keep Dumping You, an open letter to management. And at that point, this was, I think, 2014, 2015, millennials were all in the news for quitting their jobs and being flighty. Luckily, the spotlight has shifted to Gen Z, but at the time, millennials are center stage. That article went viral for two reasons. One, a lot of millennials resonated with it and thinking that the jobs that they worked really hard to get, went into debt to get degrees to get this job, weren't playing out the way they hoped for. And it also struck a chord with managers because they felt like, who are you to make all these demands? And who are you to want purpose and meaning and leadership out of work? Like, I never got that, so just suck it up. So it became really divisive. And I'm sitting there at 24, unsure of what to do because I have just won the heart of half the internet and really pissed off the other half. And sitting with that was challenging because I'm a non-confrontational person. But what that article gave way to was my introduction to what is now LinkedIn Learning. I was introduced to what was at the time lynda.com because of that article to make a course on millennial talent retention. That was my very first course with what is now LinkedIn Learning, then lynda.com. And that was rocket fuel for my entire career. So when I look back and I think about myself just hitting like refresh, 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 getting both these like love messages and hate messages for an article, I was in such a weird place mentally. But only months later, my career totally changed because of that article. So for me, that was the hardest transition. Like I had this cushy kind of job in advertising and then this weird viral experience. And then somehow this door opened to something that would, over time, really change my entire career.
Wonderful, but scary at the time. Let's dig in a little bit to the experience of creating what now number more than 20 courses for LinkedIn Learning on some of the topics you've mentioned. And of course, your personal favorite, leading yourself, which is sitting alongside the book, I guess. What have you learned from the work done in creating these learning courses? And what have been the best questions that learners have asked you along the way?
I have learned so much from LinkedIn Learning and the learners I've had the privilege of teaching over the last 10 years. It has been the most transformative experience. Number one, from LinkedIn Learning themselves and the coaching that they're able to provide. I didn't have a lot of experience doing this prior to becoming an instructor. I was more of a writer, and they made me an on camera presence over the course of many years because their teams are great. And the learners on LinkedIn Learning are equally great because most of them are self elected. They're there because they want to be there, not because someone told them to be there. And because they want to be there, they engage really thoughtfully and they ask amazing questions. And they push me to look at research in new ways, to dig deeper into things, to address my own sort of biases and opinions that might not be grounded in fact. And every comment and every question has made me a better instructor. So it's easy to think like, oh, like I worked really hard for this, which is also true. But I also had the privilege of exceptional coaching from LinkedIn and exceptional coaching from the students I teach.
Indeed. It took more than a village, right? But a big village.
I think all teachers, professors, anyone who teaches coaches would say the same. You learn just as much on the other side.
Absolutely. So let's go back to these young people who are no longer millennials. The young ones are now Gen Z, if not Alpha. But as you think of all the different ways that you've looked at and experienced corporate culture, leadership, work life, all the different aspects that go into building a career, what advice do you have for these early career professionals who are starting out?
My advice would be twofold, and it seems like they're opposites, but I want to get into why they're together. First, lower your expectations. We enter the world of work with sky high expectations. We've read all about servant leadership and inspirational leadership and how your boss should nurture you, and work should be this amazing, fulfilling thing where you feel so emotionally fulfilled every day. Notch it down. Okay, high expectations are good, but let's ground in reality of the entry level experience most people have. Second to that, you have more power than you think. Yes, there is an entry level experience. Yes, some things are not going to be perfect. Yes, some is going to be frustrating, even, but you have more power than you think, even if you're working at an entry level role in a huge company. So I think holding those two truths of some things are going to go wrong that are out of my control, and I have more power than I think is the bedrock for career growth.
I'm thinking you might develop some more about having more power than you think in talking about your book. So let's move on to that. Let's talk about leading yourself. It's relatively recently published. It's about creating meaning, joy, and opportunities at work, even if your job isn't perfect. You might choose to see it in some respect as the antithesis of our book, which is all about disrupting and shifting careers. But in the end, we're people in jobs with feelings and meaning. And so there is actually a lot more overlap. But what led you to write the book? And how did you pick the audacious topics, which include chapter titles that really made me giggle, like working with other people, even annoying ones?
The journey to this book was a long one. I first created a LinkedIn Learning course called Leading Yourself in 2017. And at the time, LinkedIn Learning, I know it seems crazy to think about this now, but they had very little leadership content. And the leadership content that they did have was focused on managers and CEOs and people in formal leadership roles, like with traditional direct reports. So I made two courses. I made Leading Yourself and I made Leading Without Formal Authority. If you're a project manager, you're not someone's boss, but you got to get them to do your thing. Because I felt like the majority of people don't have direct reports and they still need some self-development content. So that was my first set out on leading yourself. And what I saw in 2020 was that course had done well, but in 2020 it exploded. And I think the reason for that is the pandemic forced a lot of white collar workers home. There wasn't the level of direction and oversight that there previously had been. There wasn't the level of certainty in strategy and career mapping that there had been. And the economic, social climate forced everyone into a sense of agency that could have previously been passed over. I'm a numbers driven person. I watched the analytics on that course. I updated that course in 2020 to address remote work and hybrid environments. I updated it again in 2024 and I followed the numbers and I let the numbers guide my research and what people were interested in. And I dove even deeper into this concept of self leadership and ultimately wrote the book on it in 2025.
Beautiful. How fantastic that the data led you to write something that was so humanly centric in the end. It's the best combination. Wonderful.
Through the great resignation, through even now, the climate of layoffs and economic uncertainty, it's never been more clear that we have to be in the driver's seat of our experience. And you mentioned that maybe my book is the opposite of yours. Maybe, but I also think you can disrupt your career without necessarily changing your job. We are definitely a Venn diagram of sorts, and I think there's more overlap than the titles would suggest.
For sure, without any question. Absolutely. You wrote an HBR article recently which began, would you be excited if your boss started a meeting saying, I want to remind you that you're a cog in a machine whose primary purpose is to hit our financial targets. It was a great reminder that most humans don't go to work just for financial gain, whether for themselves or for their bosses. However, the shareholders might see things. But tell us more about how you developed your arguments there around intrinsic motivation and how important it is to create this as a leader.
So you've picked up on two things in the examples you've shared. One, my chapter title of how to work with people, even annoying ones. And two, would you be excited if your boss said you're a cog in a financial machine? And what I think is interesting about both of the things you've picked up on is I make a proactive effort to write in a really human voice. I read a lot of leadership books. They're great. I pull through a lot of research, which is exceptionally done, but I write the way I talk in plain language that people resonate with. So back to the cog in a machine. There's been a lot written about intrinsic motivation and the power of why and whatever kind of, label you want to attribute to that feeling. But what I wanted to do with that article and what I strive to do in all my work is to make the research really human. And what we know about intrinsic motivation and the way that relates to innovation, discretionary effort, is that people need to feel part of something bigger than themselves and they need to know their part matters. So if you feel like a cog in a money making machine, yeah, maybe like your little cog part is important and maybe you are part of something bigger than yourself, but you don't care about what that thing is doing. We know that feeling of like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. That has a cascading effect on your work output and also your emotional well being. So addressing it at the top of the stream is the most proactive approach. And there's been a lot written about, some by me, how leaders can do this. But what I wanted to offer with leading yourself is how you can do it for you, and that you don't need to wait for a leader to inspire you. You don't need to wait for the perfect career roadmap to be laid out. You have the agency to inspire yourself. And that is empowering to individual employees and also a relief to leaders because they're overwhelmed. They're leading too many people. They got too much to do and they don't have time to be inspirational. So it's time to share the load in a sense.
That's lovely and so important. I'm in complete agreement with you that there is so much guff spoken using long words and terms and things that are designed to impress, which basically can be translated into absolutely simple human connecting language. And I tend to distrust fundamentally anyone who talks to me in blah, blah business language, even though I'm perfectly capable of understanding it. So maybe this leads us into a question about what would you do if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world of work? What would it be?
I wish I got 3 wishes, but only one. I'll tie it back to, I guess, the really slow uphill magic wand I'm trying to wave right now, which is I wish there was a greater sense of agency at work. And unfortunately, I think we're trending in the opposite direction because of AI and economic uncertainty and how much power organizations, particularly large ones, have, the climate around layoffs. It is my belief anecdotally, and some of the evidence backs it up, that we feel more disempowered in our careers than we ever have, despite having more options than we've ever had. So that is the magic wand I would wave, is a sense of empowerment instead of defeatism.
I'll be with you on wielding that, definitely. But you're right, it's slow. On the sort of magic questions, if you could go back and talk to 18-year-old Elizabeth, what would you want to tell her?
Oh, goodness. I just want to give her a hug. She was trying so hard and she made so many mistakes that she took so personally. But I think the piece of advice that I would give 18-year-old Elizabeth, that late 20 something, early 30 something Elizabeth actually got from Dory Clark, which would be to play the long game. I was so bent on the next step and an immediate payout, as a lot of young people are, as we all are, in a culture of instant gratification. I was so unwilling to see things that didn't line up exactly with the path that I had in my mind. I did not put enough effort into serendipity. I did not build relationships that I didn't see professional payout for myself. And Dory Clark's work around the long game and Entrepreneurial You was life-changing to me. And in hindsight, I see that the best things I got was not because I chased them like so hard, but because I opened the door for them to come to me. And I wish 18-year-old Elizabeth would be a little less earnest and a little more open.
Thank you, Dory, for that insight. She's an old friend of ours too, as you know. But yes, that notion that it probably won't be the most productive or the most fun or rewarding to have everything right now, because you can never see what's going on, even if you do get everything right now.
And even if you have a perfect plan right now, it's not going to work because everything's changing all the time.
Yes. And I'm 61 and I'm still thinking about what will I do next year and the year after? And do I really need to worry about the year after that? Not because I won't be working, but because who knows where I'll be or what I'll be excited by then. And if we could all have a bit more of that particular pinch of salt, it would be very good. Let's look at organizations. Let's give organizations either some credit or a push to do better. What would you like to see companies doing better in general when it comes to talent and career management? And if you have any great examples that you can quote, that would be fantastic.
We'll give them both credit and a push because organizations have come a long way in the last few decades. And there's a long road. There's more that is possible. I think the counsel that I would give, and I'll share an example with this too, is to empower the front lines to lead. And the challenge and the reason that doesn't happen is because that empowerment comes with a level of risk taking, autonomy, failure, as Amy Edmondson has so eloquently written about in her new book, and things that boards don't really like. The challenge is not empowering the front lines is equally, if not more risky in the long term. There are not these short bursts of failures. There are not the small, missed decisions, but there are huge levels of disengagement that lead to big mistakes and lost opportunities down the line. So it's all about whether you want to index for the near term or for the long term. Organizations who I have seen do this really well weave that through their onboarding experience. And I just wrote a piece about this for Fast Company. Is risk-taking okay? Because the new person wants to eagerly impress. They don't want to make a mistake. So in onboarding, when an organization shares examples of, here are all the things we've messed up in the last 12 months, and all the people who did it still work here, and they're still respected, and they're still leading things. And here's what we learned from that. That cultural tone is so different than the traditional, here's everything you have to do, here's all the red tape that you're going to have to walk on your first few days. When you institutionalize that each person is empowered, each person is allowed to take risk within reason, to fail within reason, you shift the cultural tone of the organization. And it's possible with just a couple of sentences in onboarding.
Yes, of course, the sentences then need to be lived out.
Yes, they cannot be fake.
Yeah. And I love the idea of sort of looking at real people who made mistakes and are still there. That's absolute proof, without any doubt.
There have been a lot of work fast and break things, like mantras like that hung about corporate offices. But the proof is always in the individual experience. And when a manager can say, hey, I messed this big thing up and cost our company hundreds of thousands of dollars, but here's everything I learned. I'm still here. I'm still respected for taking that risk. That is real proof.
And I generally encourage my leader clients to instigate meetings in which people come and share and treasure their failure experiences and actually celebrate them. Again, if it's done authentically, then it's wonderful. If it's not, then it's just yet another fake, stupid meeting that shouldn't happen.
I really like the examples Amy Edmondson included in her book. I think the book is titled Right Kind of Wrong, about intelligent failure. It was really striking. And I'm such a natural, earnest perfectionist. I've made progress, but I still have a long way to go. And I hate failing, but I've come to recognize how important it is.
Absolutely. There is treasure in failure, no doubt of that. What are your most exciting projects for the rest of the year and into 2026?
LinkedIn Learning has released a new feature called AI coaching on their platform, where you can practice certain situations with what I have found is an exceptional I guess you would say, bot persona. And to me, that has been a learning breakthrough, because so much content in L&D, my own included sometimes, is theoretical and it's hard to make it really actionable. You can walk through examples, you can give frameworks and say, put your details in here. But that capability is unreal in terms of behavioral change that is possible. So I've been really focused on weaving technology like that through my content, making self-leadership practicable in an environment with no risk, where you don't have to practice in front of your boss or your colleagues. You can practice with artificial intelligence and get really fluid. So that has been tremendously exciting for me. I'm also working on a program to scale in-person self-leadership training called Leading Yourself First. I love training. I love designing training, but I am one person, and that has proven quite challenging in the last year or so. So I'm focused on how can I make these powerful in-person experiences scalable and build this empowered culture in a way that is not me going around to every team of 20. It's just going to take too long.
Let us know if we can help you with that. It's the kind of thing that I think we'd get pretty excited about too.
Oh, I'd absolutely love your support.
Good, good, good. Well, Elizabeth, I think we are done with this beautiful and rich conversation, incredibly human, incredibly simple, and yet powerful. So thank you so much for joining me. We will give shout outs to all the people and books and places and ideas that you've mentioned, so that the audience can really lock in and get into the whole idea and way of being in self-leadership. Thank you.
Absolutely. You are the common denominator in all of your work experiences and in your whole life. So thanks to everyone for hanging out with the two of us today and investing this time in yourself.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.